Before I dive into this review, I wanted to give a huge shout out to Mills, my latest patron, on patreon.com. You can find the link down below. I find I don't really advertise my Patreon a lot. You know, it's kind of awkward for me to be like, give me your money, I'm poor, I want to see more shows and buy more records. But it's true, I do. So yeah, if you want to be cool like Mills, you can follow that link down below for my patron. Do get your name at the end of my videos, you know, with the little thank you patrons crawl. Whenever I do live streams, which isn't a lot, but you know, I'm trying to get back on there. You'll get a personal shout out from me, kind of like what I'm doing now. And yeah, so thank you, Mills. Cool cat. And I guess with that, let's get on with the review. Summit by 7 Impale. You know, it's always interesting whenever I see an album that's all in caps and all the, you know, tracks itself are all in caps. I always think that they're being shouted at. So whenever anybody's just like, oh, what are you listening to? It's like, I'm listening to Summit by 7 Impale. Yeah, 7 Impale is a very interesting and fun progressive rock band from, I want to say they're from Norway. Gonna check that out before I spit that. Yeah, Norway, guided one. Of course it's from Norway. Norway's given us amazing prog like this. Yeah, getting their start back in 2010, putting out their first record in 2014. And this was one of the first albums that I remember the community that I was building up back in 2014. Oh boy, if I can go back that far, saying, hey, you got to check these guys out. They're doing some really interesting things in the prog sphere. And yeah, the first one of City of the Sun really blew me away. It was a really fun kind of take on this kind of darker set of prog that Norway loves to produce. You know, it's giving me like Anglagard kind of flavors from the 90s, or All Traps on Earth, All Traps on Earth, All Drops, All Light Traps on Earth, something along those lines. But Oligarch is another one, like all those really deep, strange, eclectic style of prog that took influences from like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Van der Graaf Generator, you know, where it's much more jazzy in approach. There's not like a consistent through line. There's not that verse, chorus style. You know, you don't necessarily have a lot of that symphonic style, but there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff being thrown at the wall. 2016 found the follow-up, their sophomore album of Contrappassio, I think is how you pronounce it. And that one didn't hit me quite as hard. And now we're 6-7 years after that sophomore album with Summit. And honestly, I have to say, I think this is their best work to date. I honestly do. This is 4 tracks across 43 minutes worth of music. In terms of structure, this is a perfect prog record. You know, you've got 4 tracks, shortest track being at 9.5 minutes. The album itself opens up with Hunter and Hydra, both at about 10.5 minutes. First side of a record being at about 21, 22 minutes. The second side of the album has Ikatros, I think is how you pronounce it, at the 9 minutes. And then ending with the longest track at 13.5 minutes with Sisyphus. So good. And what I love is that like they're not leaning on the conventional styles of music and instruments to lead these songs through. You know, the main driving force most of the time is either the mellotron synthesizers or saxophone and like brass instruments. I'm loving that sax. Man, it is a deep and heavy and brutal sound. Introduced to a lot of these tracks right off the get-go with their opening track of Hunter, which has this ebb and flow, this bombastic brutality that's kind of countered and contrasted with this more heavenly approach. And a lot of this can even be distilled within the lead singer that's really channeling like the Scott Walker feeling. You know, it's got this very verbose and abrasive operatic kind of singing styles that I loved within a Scott Walker with like Bish Bosh or The Drift. But it's, instead of it being more of like a gothic drone rock, we're getting it in this chaotic, eclectic prog. And I'm loving this give and take. Like his voice works both within this chaotic aspect of the album, but it also works within those more heavenly, somber moments as well. So Hunter does a great job of opening up, and as I mentioned, I love the ebb and flow. Each movement within this track feels very organic. It paces very, very well within itself, and it blends very well into the second track of Hydra. And I like how Hydra is a little bit more rooted into its themes. You know, I feel like Hunter was a lot more bombastic, a lot more like, where are we going? Where's the next part? You know, it felt like a hunter that's running through the woods, that's chasing a game, that's not quite sure where it's going to go next. I feel like Hydra is much more of that monster that's just taking its time, walking through the aspects, walking through the scenery. And it starts off very somber, very slow, very, you know, it's building its momentum. So by the time we get into the midpoint of the track, we have this driving beast that's really kind of just destroying the landscape. It's giving me flavors of more modern prog outfits like Motorpsycho that has this driven rock root within it that I really gravitate to. And it's all those different instruments, man. That Hammond B organ that really drips with that beauty. It's giving me those callbacks to, you know, some of the more playful styles of John Lord. But man, when it's presented in this kind of a dark dirge, it provides such a really unique concept in that sense. The third track of Icarus, I think it's how you Icaros, is the most like Van der Graaf generator in that sense. It's the most like dense track on here. It's got a lot of different moving parts and it's very intense. I already said that. It's got this bombastic beat to it. Once again, we have a lot of the sax on here. We have a lot of that mellotron, a lot of that synth on there. It's grating. We don't have a whole lot of like really perch on here. It's just like you're hanging on for the ride, which then brings us into the final track, my favorite track, no surprises there, of Sisyphus that... I love the build. I love the climb. This is what brings me to PROG. We have a few of the ideas that are kind of planted at the beginning that really bloom and come forth by the end of the track. What I love is the ending of this piece, even though like it's the longest piece, it flies by. And part of that is that once we get to about the midpoint, they really root themselves and begin to slowly build the track up. And that is my favorite type of kind of finale on here. You know, it's they add one sound here to the fold, they add another sound here to the fold, but at all points it is rooted firmly within this drive, within this rhythm section that everything is able to build upon. The only kind of criticism or nitpick that I'll have is that final play out of Sisyphus, I wanted this explosion of sound. I wanted this big revolution or resolution within the sound. And all we get is a very satisfying play out. And that's fine. It's just I was really hoping for more. So this is more of like not being angry of what's on the page, but more of like what could have been on the page. And I can't really fault it for that sense. My only other major nitpick or criticism is that this album doesn't have a lot of like perch moments, those moments that I can really sink my teeth into. I mean, there's a reason why this album came out, 2 weeks ago at this point, and I'm only now getting an album review out. I mean, most of it was because I was listening to the Avenged Sevenfold album, which, if you listen to Avenged Sevenfold, this album bleeds right into it. So if you listen to Life is But a Dream and then cue up Summit right afterwards, it's as though you're listening right into a continuous stream. That was a really fun revolution of mine. Resolution? Anyway, getting off track, this album does a great job of moving from passage to passage, movement to movement, but I feel as though I was really hoping for a really good perch that I could sink my teeth into. This album is extremely dense, and that's one of the things that I love about PROG, but the other thing that I love about PROG is this really dense, really bombastic, really chaotic sounds that have roots in these brilliant soundscape moments, these moments that I can really like bask in. And I just feel as though this album's a little bit void of those. When the music hit, it hits so friggin' hard. So I can't fault it for something that it doesn't have on the album, if that makes any sense. So yeah, in the end, this was a knockout for me. This was a real surprise from Seven Impale. Again, I really enjoyed the first 2 records, but this took what they learned from those first 2 records and really applied it and learned from it. This is their best work to date, and it'll be very hard to top, but I am extremely excited to see where Seven Impale goes from here. It's for that reason that I'll say Summit by Seven Impale is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. This is one you'll want to have in your collection, folks. This is one that you'll really want to have. It kept giving back to me. I never reached a point of diminishing returns for this record. I had a blast with it. I really hope you will too. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about it. I want to know what you guys thought about this record. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. Because that's all I've got for you guys today. So I want to thank you guys all for watching. I want to thank Mills once again for supporting me on Patreon. If you want to support me and be a cool cat like Mills, head on over to Patreon. It's down below. Go and check that out because I do a really bad job of promoting that. So this is my like once a year practically of promoting that. But yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, that's out.